Chopin, my favorite composer. Hello everybody, I haven't spoken to you for a while. Today I want to share with you my memories of my life in Poland. I came here in 1975. The communism was still there. And I'd like you to bear with me my reflection and memories of my life. That was inspired by the Ukraine situation. Sorry for that, and by this recent war. So I thought that I will explain to you, maybe through my own travail and life, what communist meant to me and my family, and of course, in a way, my country, and what it meant to be under occupation, straightforward, after the German occupation by Russian, because it was occupation. First of all, I'd like to thank Itzhak for this lovely scarf. Thank you, Itzhak. And thank you all my subscribers to bear with me and my timing. And hope that this little sharing will be useful for you. I titled this, "What it is not what it seems, and what it seems is not what it is." And I, by all my exploration of life, always try to find as close the truth as I can bear it and find the truth altogether. So I quote Carl Jung on truths. There are not many truths. There are only a few. Their meaning is too deep to grasp other than symbols. In other words, we need art. We need poets and artists, philosophers and truth tellers to keep us really sane. And I know that in my life, and I knew that somehow intuitively, but I have met many confusing situations and tried to unravel what is going on in my country, what is wrong with my family, which was alcoholic, what's wrong with my parents who are PTSD as I am, what's wrong with my church, what's wrong with my country, what's wrong, what's going on, why so many strange silences, secrets, fears, confusion in every aspect of our life and my personal life. So it was like a double bind. I was a child born in 1950, so just after the war, a huge amount of losses, and also moved to the place in Poland which it used to be East Prussia, Mazur, and my parents were there, and born to two people who tried to survive it, the whole thing. My father deeply traumatized, but very wise, diplomatic, kosher in a way, observing. My mother was fury incarnate. She was broken and borderline. I was her scapegoat. I seemed to be a scapegoat to many people. And I, as a child, was quite intuitive and logical. And I couldn't figure it out why my parents sometimes were silent where I was seeing something was wrong. It's only later I comprehended that they were simply protecting us as their children and themselves, because they were not party members, you see. And that was very important. My father was approached just after the war by a local bodies would he be a chief of that village, which would involve him being a member of the party, and he declined. By declining, he was putting himself in a very different position to many people, because he was immediately punished by it. Each person just after the war got a bit of a land, and my father's land was scattered in 7 different pieces all over the village. So I couldn't understand as a child why every farmer has got land in one piece, and my parents seemed to be just marching from one part to another. And that was part of how the officials managed to punish him, because punishment, stoking, observing the neighbors was a kind of natural. People were always looking who else is going to betray them. We've been betrayed as a family by many people, by informers, so to speak, a bit like Stasi in Germany, you see. So informers were very important. And I didn't know who was informer and who wasn't, but I sensed that some of the neighbors were not as good as my parents claimed them to be. So very early on, because of the trauma, because of the having no money, and because of having no land really to cultivate properly, to earn money, and also you have to give a lot of what you have, potatoes, wheat, to the government. That was part of the deal. There was a lot of also national farming. The lands was taken, which was very ruinous. It was really no good. And the small farmers were encouraged to sort of gather in the groups so they can give more wealth to the governments. So it was almost as if I was early on a kind of too traumatized parents to even hear the music of life, as I call it, as I am a musician. I enjoyed, noises and shapes in my life. And I knew that my father was completely silent. But what he did, he yelled and screamed in the night. That was his trauma. The war trauma, he was nearly killed twice, and the trauma of not having enough money, working in the forest, working on the farm, not being able to do his beloved horses because that was not allowed, fishing was not allowed, nothing was allowed. I tell you, the farmers in the village once went and stolen lots of fish, and we as youngsters had to help my mother to hide this fish and prepare this fish. But one day somebody phoned the police, and I remember having a photograph in my family album where a few guys, looking at the pile of fish, and they could have been put to prison, but they had to pay fine, you see, for this daring sort of escapade. And I could look in their faces, never mind the fine, but what a pity, such a good lot of good fish wasted. Because of course nothing was in the shop. The shopkeeper was a goddess. The shop person who worked in any shop was a boss. We had to be very polite to shopkeepers, because not many things were in the shop. We were better off because we're in the village. People in the town were much worse off. And I remember one of the things at school, when the government decided that we must not have crosses in the class, and we must not have any kind of pictures of any remotely, remembering that we had anything like Holy Mary somewhere or cross. And that was in the second year of school. And I took the chair that was brought up by the parents who were rather independent. And I climbed the chair and I put the cross back on the wall. And I remember that the teacher came, local teacher, director of the school, and said, and ask us who put the cross on the wall. And I sort of, we decided, all kids, I was maybe 8 or 9, that we're not going to tell her. She suspected who did it, you see. She knew my parents well, and she knew the only kid who could probably be that daring would be me. And they kept us until about 8 o'clock in the night. And she came to me and whispered, do you know, Micah, I know that you did it. I would lose my job. Could you please help me to regain my dignity and put the cross back on the wall? And I did. The parents took us back. So that was my village. There were 3 laws, the 3 histories. There was a church teaching, there was a school. History was totally and utterly not what it was. And also my parents, who quietly deliver different stories. And that was sort of story of my life in Poland till I came here. I came here in 1975. And throughout college and Warsaw, I give you a few examples, that was the case. So I was used to kind of looking what really is and what it seems to be. I was also encouraged by my parents to study the enemy. I even went and was part of the competition about the Lenin. Well, Lenin was, of course, God. Stalin died when I was born, so I didn't realize how important this Stalin is, a bit like Putin in Russia now. So I knew that Lenin had 245 pseudonames and all sorts of things like that. But you know, whatever Lenin did, we had to learn that he was a great learned man, and he had an authority of practically every subject: religion, politics, economy. It was really hilarious. It's only when I was in Warsaw, and we were, once I remember at Warsaw University discussing Lenin and Stalin, that I realized how terrified and terrorized Russian societies were, even more than us. First of all, they believed, that was the program of the Russian communist engineering, that the satellite country are really the ones who are poor relation, and the Russians had to keep us all, which was exactly the opposite to what it was, because it was our economy which supported Russians and their disastrous national farming, and of course their Cold War, which cost them a lot, and their competition with everything else. So we were very useful for them. And at university, I remember 3 Russian girls, when we were discussing, that was a philosophy class, Lenin's teaching, they stood up and walked out. And we were bewildered by it. But now I understand, because Warsaw was full, and university and every school full of youngsters who were watching them. And if that went back to embassy, they would have been sent back to Russia. And for them, Poland was what England was, and France for us in Poland. So they loved living in Poland at that time. And after the university, they were explaining that to us, because they knew that nobody was watching them, and said that they were terrified that they would have been sent back to Russia. So you see that terror, suspicion, paranoia. So in one way, dysfunctional family and dysfunctional system, it's almost like a double bind. And there was never ever any, of course, understanding that that's not the case. I kind of sensed it, we all sensed it. My parents had a few friends, but my father and my mother was very courageous in that way, spiritually, that they were fearless. We were burned by the informers a day before Christmas when I was 15. And when the police came, it was a huge fire. We lost almost everything. And I knew who did that and who started the fire. And I was bewildered at the age of 15 why my father sat quietly and said nothing. It took me years to comprehend why he could not afford to name the guys who started the fire. So you see, if you were uncomfortable to the system, if you were not with it, and of course, many people understood that being a party member, because there was only one party in this democratic communist system, Polish Communist Party, then that would be better for you. I then went to college, not something I wanted, but it was a sort of college which was supposed to prepare me for a job. And there I experienced even more obviously the situation, what communism was all about. I remember I was approached by my friend when I was second year in college, who asked me whether I wouldn't mind to be a party member. For this system, for the communists, it was very important that they kind of had lots of youngsters who were maybe better born or of different background, because it was good to show to people that we are, really for it. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not that bothered. My parents are not, and I don't suppose I'll be bothered. He said, look, you'll have a better life. You'll have a better bread, so to speak. I said, I don't suppose party will give me any bread. So go away. But that was sort of theme in my life, that I was approached many times to join the party, even to the point that I'll give you an example in a minute, that I was approached when I went to a party conference for youth. I was a member of the village kind of youth, and I was also a scout, and I was invited to Warsaw. I remember that I did some speech which my auntie nearly fainted and locked me up in the flat, telling me that I probably would endanger the whole family. But that's a long story. But in this Warsaw party conference, there was a young man who approached me. I was still about 15, 16, 17. Would I like to come to Warsaw University? And maybe if he helps me to come to Warsaw University, maybe then I can have a year of training in Moscow. And I thought, what is he talking about? I said, look, if I want to be in Warsaw University, I probably will have to take exams. And I'll do that on my own, but thank you very much. Lo and behold, once I went to Warsaw University, I was sort of involved in the sort of celebration of new students year. And whom do I see in this new student year celebration in the Culture Palace, a present for communist Russia? We were giggling about it. They meant to give us 7 of these monstrous buildings. He is there, and he looked at me and looked at me and looked at me and said, why do I know you? Face seems to be familiar. He was a party member, the one who was always delegated, I would imagine, to get as many youngsters, clever youngsters, to the party as possible, possibly train them. And he looked at me and said, oh, so you are in a Warsaw University? And I just smiled and said, yes, so I am. And that's kind of theme. Also, when I was at university, I was approached again by many professors who quietly said, listen, how about if you, so to speak, become a party member? I said, listen, I'm not that bothered. To such a point was a difficult student that second year at my university, again in assemblies of students, I was named as a kind of uncomfortable student, and I was my membership of various youth organizations was taken away in the form that was again to punish me, because first of all they gave me all sorts of diplomas and things, and then once they realized that I'm this obnoxious child of communists, they thought that is time to punish me. Not that I bothered, or feel very bad about it. I felt rather pleased. So this is what happens, you see, when we were in that system. We knew that system was completely and utterly unacceptable. The guys who were party members, the people who had privileges. I just about used Polish word. They had special shops, for instance. So whereas we didn't have much in the shops, they had dollars, and they had dollar shops, so to speak. And then they could go and buy whiskey and clothes and tin meat and everything they needed, because of course they had dollars and they had their shops. We didn't, so we had to sort of chance it whatever was there. And sometimes there was a bit, and sometimes there was not. Well, as a student, I was fed by, so to speak, so I didn't have to queue hours and no hours. That system was about to destroy the psyche of countries, the psychology of a country. Because if you face with the fact that your wage is not sufficient for you to survive, you will be drinking as a man. A woman would cheat in the office because she would have to, go and queue for a few hours to get a bone for the soup. So the whole situation was about destroying the goodness of the people, and that's why you see with this war, which is complex and absolutely and utterly. I'm not sentimental about it. I know what big boys are all about. It's a very tragic. It always is. The war is dirty, stupid, idiotic. We women know that, and we have to protect mothers and children. But to think sentimentally that this war is clean or kosher would be ridiculous. I am trained by my childhood, by my parents, by my trauma, and by my mind to always question what is really going on. And I know that as I grew and as I mature and spent years of listening to other people and looking at myself, that life is complex. The communist was really simple for us to discover. We knew that we knew who our enemy was, in a sense. We also knew what the teaching of church was. The church became really not always a spiritual place, but also political, opposing to communist place. So the church, in a sense, lost its purpose because it became politicized. There was plenty of priests who were spies. There were plenty of unbelievable amount of trained in Russia guys who penetrated our armies, our universities, our families, our church. There was spy everywhere. They were, so to speak, helpers for the system. And that's how it is, whether they are oligarchs, whether they are, whether they are Chinese spies or Russian spies, that's how it works, especially in that system. And I kind of didn't have anywhere to go with it because we all sort of comprehended. My friends, the people I associated myself with, were not party members. At university, I work as a scout with deaf children, and I also had a lot to do with scouts. But at some time, because there was a fusion of the communistic organization, quite a lot of people with years of experience deliberately step out as a protest. We did protest as much as we could, but for instance, we couldn't go on the streets, for instance, as a students. I nearly lost my university place because I once nicked the stamp to put on the placard which we put on the church because my friends and me, we wrote a play which was a religious subject, and of course I was called to come to the director office, and I played stupid and said, well, I think I live in a free society and free democracy. I don't know why I couldn't really do anything about it. I did nothing wrong, so they let me go. But I nearly lost the university place very often because I was pointing out, for instance, to professors who were not well learned, and because there were professors title given by government rather than the merit professors, they were not really that educated, some of them. And once I was I was chased by one of them, which was a classic professor. Luckily for me, I loved philosophy and classics, and she took me and failed me about 7 times, and eventually I said that I will ask for the commission for few people, for few professors to be with me, and she sort of chickened out. And for the rest of my university times, she was coming and asking me whether I can have influenced some of my colleagues because they are too nervous, and I have such a good time with the friends, and I'm good with students. Really, truly, not a nice woman, and I knew that she was a government sort of planted there to observe us and to see what we are up to. Uh, 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 the system was not at all interested in us. They would fish out whatever they could do, and they would offer us whatever we can be offered, providing we cooperate. So we could have gone then to party to ambassadors, or we could travel or whatever. We couldn't travel, you see, especially that we didn't have much money. There was absolutely no way, unless you were, of course, involved with the party, or neither would we be allowed. Um, and I sort of, when I came to England, my secretary from university gave me a certificate that I'm still a student. So this is, and I came for the student on the student visa. Otherwise, they probably would not let me go. The whole situation was so difficult because we as a system is producing paranoia and producing insecurity and produces a suspicion. You never knew which of your neighbor would do things for you. So all tyrannical systems are about that, but this was a really extraordinary. My mother used to say, that this stupid system will collapse in 5 minutes, and why I'm bothered, I should be prepared to be a wife of a squire or ambassador or general. That's why she sent me to agriculture college. And when I said to her that I actually don't fancy any of those guys because they would be communists, she said, this stupid system will collapse next day. But of course it didn't. She had total disregard for it. And of course she died first. And in a sense, after we were burned, 2 years later, she collapsed. Her heart couldn't cope with it because she did so much for the village and was extremely useful and helpful to them. But she couldn't. I think she died from broken heart because to be burned by your own people, it's really, really not easy to survive. This atmosphere of oppression, of poverty and fear was always the theme. With the Warsaw situation, I kind of began to realize how much I escaped even before that, because in the village at least we had a certain amount of freedom. What I realized in university, how many people were already groomed to do whatever. I remember one of my friends in the first year, we were talking, in the group and say what we would dream, what our dream was. She said, well, I'm going to work in the Polish radio. I said, how can you know that? Oh, she said, my father is in the army and he will fix that for me. And I played stupid. I said, oh my goodness, I don't want to be fixed by anybody. I will try to make it on my own. And I remember that I teased her mercilessly for the whole time. But that was the case. And I had no idea. The mediocre minds which went there because of the knowing somebody was just a theme. In my village, I was not really among mediocre people. They were drinking, but they were intelligent people, and they were fun. But I met most stupid crowd at Warsaw University, with a few exceptions, which I befriended as usual. This situation, this gentleman who offered me the Moscow holiday, so to speak, I often meditate upon what would happen if I was tempted. I also once I wanted to be a singer, and I had a reasonably good voice, and I remember there was a guy in our party, and I sang something, and he said, if you marry me, I will organize a festival in Opole, which was a very famous festival. I'll train you, we'll train you, army will train you, and you will become our representative. That was another offer which I had, And that was literally the privileged group, the communists. I was teaching once a policeman to pass his A-level, and I was going to his flat. And what this flat was the flat of probably upper middle class Polish family, where he was boastful that he was given this flat. And he said, look, there were pictures on the wall. Now they are not pictures. They took the pictures, but they couldn't live in the flat. And I'm living here. And I just pretended, my father trained me well, pretended that nothing happens and that I just will help him to pass the exams. But I felt like punching his face, but I couldn't really. So these things in a small life, my one person life, it is absolutely obvious that this system was operating, and that's how it was. You never was sure that what people tell you that's exactly what it is. You never will know what's going on, and that's how it is today. The sort of new communists and the wave of Red Brigade is well upon us. I can tell you that probably for another video. I don't want to bore you with it. But what I'm saying is that coming from that system and having the sort of double bind, I was used to vivisecting whatever people said. And at the same time, I carry a certain amount of naivety, which of course didn't help me. But to know your enemy, as I was brought up by the church and by my parents, that to be absolutely sure that you recognize your enemy more than your friend, really truly was useful, because we were surrounded by whispers, surrounded by observing people, surrounded by God knows what, yeah? And my parents lived that way. At the same time, they lived with an utter disregard for this system. In the marches which we had to do, first May marches and various marches, I remember in that college, agriculture college, my name was mentioned. I thought, why do they mention my name? They were sort of saying what a lovely student I was and what a clever person I am. And I thought, who gave them this information? There was always this question, how do they know that? Who gave them information? Why do they mention? You were a sort of a property of the system. And if you get hooked, and lots of, even my Polish housekeeper, I remember one Polish housekeeper who was really, really incredibly useful in that respect, that she was perpetually trying to please me. I said, look, Christina, could you just please go away, do what you do and go to your room and leave me alone. Don't bring me slippers at 12 o'clock when I'm coming from the theater. And she said, look, she burst to tears once. She said, I don't know, Maya, how to please you. I said, well, why do you need to please me? Well, I use this method all the time, and I bought myself 3 flats in Warsaw. I said, swines like you help the communists, so you can pack your bag. And she was dead honest. She said, I have this method of my surviving doesn't work on you. I said, I do not respond to methods. If you're honest with me, or even if you quarrel or whatever, but methods indeed don't work on me. But how honest she was in her unconsciousness, and how classic she was. So she was a fabulous opportunist, of course, one of the people who helped herself with it, yeah? So I remember that in Warsaw University, that was obvious to me that this, giving me privileges, taking privileges from me was just a style of this system working. If you get hooked on this privilege, of course, it'd be great, but I was not one for it. So this time I look at this war in Ukraine, I look at what's happening. Of course, Putin is praised by Russians because he sort of brought wealth to them. He brought wealth to his pocket and oligarchs, and on the whole, it's a magnificently rich country full of lovely, educated people. They could have done much better without it. and they were robbed of everything, and the same in Ukraine. I have no illusion. That's a long story, and other politicians, geopoliticians, and other more clever guys are talking about. I'm just talking about my own personal experiences. This is enough for you probably to sort of have a feeling that I know how difficult it is. This is horrendous, and usually people who pay are people on the ground who are absolutely the most innocent. But that's the sacrificial lambs, yeah. Russians who destroyed 50 million lives historically. Stalin used to say in Russian, "У нас человек не стоит." Human life costs nothing, and that's exactly the game of those guys. And that I had the sense that my life was mine and not mine in many shapes. That I could be bettered if I was just selling my soul, and that's something which my parents, thank God, drummed to us that that's not a good idea. However, I remember, I'll tell you that as time passes, I better finish. I finished university and still communist was there, and I decided to run because, of course, I couldn't stay in Warsaw. Warsaw was a closed city. In the communists, you couldn't just move freely. You were delegated to your geographical arena, and I knew that I'm not fancy going to some national farming and teach Polish or work with kids because I would kill somebody. I was sufficiently angry and frustrated and go to prison. So literally. So I decided to run, and I managed to come here, and that's another story. I don't have any illusion that my background, the communist, the alcoholism, made me codependent, or made me compulsive helper, or make me more heroic, or make me wanting to find out. My passion to find out what the hell is going on inside me and around me is absolutely constant, thank God. I believe that that was a good training for me to be of use to people. I read you something what Confucius said about philosophy of life. He who really is kind can never be unhappy. He who is really wise can never be confused. He who is really brave can never be afraid. Fear was part of communists, inflicting fear, a bit like with Corona. I once had a lecture in Jungian Institute on fear, and the gentleman asked me whether I'm afraid. I said that I'm probably not that much afraid, maybe other feelings I have, and he said, But I said, if I get carried away, kick me in the leg. So I think I'll stop carrying away, because he did. I was going overboard there. These gods of ours, whether the communists are ours, Putin, and I've met lots of gods. And as I say, if you don't believe in God and you have a wrong, you become a god. Hell breaks loose. So I'd rather follow that pattern. Of course, we have to help. Of course, we have to have, as Gorky put it, don't just commiserate when you follow man is in trouble. Just help him. And we Poles do, but I fear for my country for many reasons, and I may talk about it next time. Let's pray. Let's say serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Bye for now.